are you? I'm Dr. Emre. Nice to meet you.
my friend.
How was your trip? Please
Very
sit.
good, thank you so much.
I assume you don't use any hair loss medication.
No, I don't.
Do you know about those, or you've never heard?
Well, I heard, but I never wanted to even come closer to try and do something about my hair loss before something was very based and founded already. And I've seen proof with my own eyes. Beautiful again. It's like art.
There is art, there is science,
Yes.
and there is also performance. Number one is that hair loss is a progressive problem. This is different than most other cosmetic problems that we see. Hair loss is not related to age. It's nothing to do with that. It's not directly proportional to aging. There are people, yes, there are
70
people,
years old.
Exactly, and there are people who lose close to all their hair by the age of 20. So it's not related to age. Some proposed treatments may sound good if we could stop time, but with the additional dimension, it may actually be a mistake. The number two, limited donor availability. So when we do hair restoration surgery, we are unable to recruit extra resources from an outer source. That means all we are doing is using what is left. Okay? Yeah. And frequently when we talk about advanced hair loss, we are actually talking about someone who's going to end up losing more than 50% of all the hair volume. So this is the second important limitation and difficulty. Doctor, how many grafts or hairs do I need? Irrelevant.
Yeah.
You need everything.
You need as many as
You need everything.
possibly.
In reality, when we plan surgery on someone with advanced hair loss, we are not trying to restore his hair back to how it was. We can't even try to do it. In fact, if we try to do it, it's a mistake. So if prospects show that you can't achieve something, trying to do it becomes a mistake. So the best approach is to figure what you can actually achieve and then try to do that. Most of the people are there to satisfy their dream, and the dream doesn't necessarily have to be a result.
Right.
A lot of people, and it applies to all cosmetic surgeries, that's right. So by having it done, they're happy.
Yes.
So these people are not too interested in what's actually going to happen. They're interested in the idea of having it done rather than what it's actually going to result. And for that, we can't fast forward time and show you what's going to happen to you. The only way is to see hundreds and thousands of case results done in various situations, which again we can't pass on in half an hour. I could show a few before and after pictures which are going to be cherry-picked from thousands of cases, which is not going to represent the average result, which is, I doubt if it's going to, it may help my marketing, but I doubt if it's going to help the patient get a realistic picture.
Yes.
So that's why I don't show any before and after pictures. And we use limited donor resources. So, so another thing, hair transplants don't prevent hair loss.
Huh.
Very
What
simple.
a beautiful thing.
Very simple. It's very simple when you say it, but if you don't say it, you don't actually realize. So you need to say it. A hair transplant doesn't prevent your hair loss. Your hair loss is a biological thing and it will happen as it is. You can't interfere with hair loss by doing a hair transplant. So then they say, doctor, I heard about side effects, or I don't want to use chemicals. Okay, but you have to understand what using medicine is. I'm not a pharmaceutical company. I don't sell medication, and I'm not going to make profit by selling, but I understand what medical treatment means. It is using a certain chemical substance for a certain benefit, accepting the possible side effects because the benefits outweigh the side effects. So if you hate your hair loss more, I hate my hair loss more, therefore I started using medication early enough so that I didn't have to be on the surgical table yet.
And you didn't have to be on the, because you
I started, that's right, I slowed down my hair
A lot
loss.
of people,
After having lost 40% of my hair, that was my estimate, I started using medication which kind of saved some of those hairs that were going to be lost, so maybe I saved an extra 10%. And now it's going very slow.
And you're still using them?
Of course.
Every day?
That's right. When I want to be bald, I will stop using medicine so I can be bald.
Yeah.
At the moment, I don't. So that's the medicine issue, okay? So, if you're looking at having good hair, you can't do that without looking into the medicine aspect of it. The surgeon can't do that for you. Why we call it donor? Because it's going to be donated.
But can it be only by me?
Yes. You can only, that's right. So human can only receive, that's right, can only receive tissue from someone who has the same DNA or similar DNA. So that means, in theory, you could only get it from an identical twin. You have to know your donor resources and what you can actually have, okay? So, assuming you didn't use any medication, you're a candidate to lose most or all of the hair on top and be left with like a horseshoe pattern on the sides and just the back. This is what is eventually going to happen to people who have advanced hair loss.
Exactly what I'm trying to prevent, kind of.
Yeah, so if you want to prevent that, you have to use medication. Don't forget. So the hair transplant is not preventing that.
Yes.
Okay? If your genes tell us that you will eventually lose 85% of all that hair, that 85 is going to be lost no matter what surgery you do on it. So there's three main steps. One is called donor harvesting. So you need donor hairs. But donor hairs can't be just plucked and used because they won't survive. They need a piece of skin attached with its root and stem cells together with it. And then the second part is you need to prepare the recipient area. So you need to make small cuts so you can push those tiny follicles in those cuts, and so they will hang on to their new locations and grow there. That's the recipient side making. And the third part is placing those pieces of skin into those new locations. So it's a three-phase surgery. It's very labor intensive, and it's a repetition of a certain surgical maneuver thousands of times on the same patient. From a donor harvesting perspective, there are two main methods to harvest donor hairs. And these two methods take advantage of two different principles. One of the methods is to take a strip of skin, a long, thin strip of skin inside the scalp, using the elasticity of the skin. Just assume like I'm pinching my hand. So when I pinch my hand, I'm actually pinching the extra skin, okay? Which means I could theoretically take out that much of a skin, stitch this area without any problems with my hand function, and I could actually use that piece of skin somewhere else on my body. So you're taking advantage of the skin laxity, and you're taking a strip out, and then you're doing microscopic dissection under the microscope done by a trained team who've been trained to do just that. And you have very few of those available in Turkey now. The other method is called FUE, which stands for follicular unit excision. So what you're doing is instead of a straight scalpel, you're using a round scalpel, which is called a punch. So it's a circular one, so that when you penetrate the skin, it causes a cylindrical cut. So you pluck an individual unit of follicles with a skin island, and you pull it out.
Oh my God.
So you take a tiny piece of skin out, but you take thousands of those out. So in the strip method, you take one piece, but you divide it under the microscope into tiny pieces. In the FUE method, you punch them individually on the human scalp. So in each of those, you're removing skin aimed at taking the hairs, but you're actually removing skin. In one, you're taking a strip of skin and stitching the wound, and the other one, you're taking punches and you're leaving tiny holes for them to heal on their own. So those tiny holes cover up within a few days because they're so tiny. It takes a couple of days, and they just cover up with tiny white dots. So whenever you do surgery on the human skin, you cause scarring. When you do the strip method, you're typically going to cause a linear scar looking like my palm crease if it's properly done. Okay, and this is assuming you razor shave the scalp, because if the hair is with hair, you're not going to see it.
Yeah.
So if you razor shave, you're going to see a linear scar like my palm crease. And then when you do FUE, the individual punching, you're going to see white dots spread across the scalp evenly. The reason why hair restoration surgery can be done is because of the coverage potential of the donor area. That means the reason why we can do these is because the remaining hair is able to cover what you did over there. And so you don't see a visible any change in the area. But if you razor shave it, these are the things you're going to see. It's not done for people who want to shave. If you're going to shave, there's going to be two consequences. Number one is you're going to expose your donor scars, no matter FUE or strip. And number two is when you shave, you also deprive the recipient site of its coverage, so then there's no point why you did the surgery.
Yeah.
So hair transplants are done under typically the assumption
That you're not
that you
gonna
want.
shave your
That's right.
scalp.
You want hair.
That you want hair.
You want the coverage of the hair. That's not only on the recipient side, but the donor as well. Hair transplant surgery is service. It's labor. Service depends on human labor. It's very difficult to measure its quality. You can't measure it by looking into a computer by saying it's RAM, its hard disk. You can measure its capabilities, but service you can't measure with such parameters. It's a performance as a whole, and every time it's done, it's different. So it's not standard. So its quality depends on the intellectual level, the training, skills, ethics,
And practice.
of the surgical team.
All this labor and so much, like, crazy. It's great. What you're doing is like, it's a service. The beautiful part about servicing is the fact that you are aware of what it is that you are willing to give for something that you want, and vice versa.
Exactly.
As a marketer, I know this by heart, that it's the nature of things to simply act on the very, very core of the basics, basically. Always work with the basics. If it's complicated, go back to the basics.
Mm-hmm.
You want something, what is it that you want? Okay, you want hair? Okay, I'm doing this. This is it's what I do.
Yeah.
I've only spent a gazillion hours and blah, 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 just so I can service you.
Exactly.
Just you.
Exactly.
And that's something that once you realize as the person who wants the service, not the one that gives it, it's much easier to understand the concept of what this is. It's a service that you asked for. And we are so happy to provide it for you in such a beautiful and elegant way, and in the most professional possible way that you could possibly imagine. And that's badass service. That's what needs to be done.
That's right. When we produce direct labor, or we offer direct labor, there is no such additional cost on it, brand cost, which is actually BS. It's nothing.
Right.
It's just a name. It doesn't change its quality once it receives that brand. Its quality was the quality produced that 14-year-old boy or girl did in whatever Thailand or somewhere.
Yeah.
You know, the average cost is set not because of certain quality standards. It's set for the consumer. They look at the consumer and they look at what they're willing to spend on this type of labor, and that becomes the average cost. It's not because that's the optimal quality, it's because that's the optimal product or service that the customer is willing to buy.
Precisely.
So there's a huge difference, you know, in costs in labor, discussing FUE and the strip methods.
Right.
Okay? And so I was saying, comparing those two methods and giving some guidelines without trying to take sides, trying to be objective. So I was putting emphasis on the intellectual level of the surgical team. So strip surgery requires a formal medical training and even more than that to perform. And it also requires technicians who were especially trained to do microscopic dissection. And so compared to that, FUE, especially now in Turkey, is generally performed by two technicians. And technician is a general word for people who are non-doctors. They're generally from medical fields, but sometimes even not. There's even examples in Turkey where housewives do FUE procedures. Okay, so there's even ambulance drivers doing FUE procedures. Unknown backgrounds to sit down, just take that instrument, you know, that punching tool, and start just punching on the skin. They're not going to do it in the best way, but they're going to do it. And it'll take me 5 minutes to show you how to do FUE, and you wouldn't do it well.
Right.
It will take you time, but you would start doing it, whereas we couldn't imagine attempting to teach you how to do strip surgery. You know, it would be just funny.
Yeah.
So there's a huge difference in the required labor between the two methods. So that's why, no surprise, in Turkey, 99.9% of the hair transplant procedures are FUE. It's very easy to provide cheap. It's easy to provide cheap. If the doctor does the whole procedure, it'll become more expensive, but it's easy to provide cheap.
Right.
The other one is not easy to provide cheap. It's impossible.
Can't do that.
It's impossible to provide cheap. Okay, so this is the problem. When we do a hair transplant, we want live hair. You know, it needs to be live so that when you transplant it, it'll grow. If you kill the hair before you actually transplant it, it's not going to grow. You're going to put a skin with no hair. Okay? And oftentimes, when you do the transplant, you can't tell if it's live. It takes a year to find out if that hair was live or not. You can't tell by the looks when it's done. Okay? It looks perfectly the same when you do it, but it was dead. Okay? So you need live hair follicles to make a hair transplant successful. Okay. On which parts of the procedure are these hairs at greatest risk? That is when the incision is done on the skin. So that's when you start cutting in the skin. That's the riskiest part, obviously. Number one is because you're cutting. And number two, that means if you miss the skin and you go through the hair, you cut the hair instead of the skin. And so when the hair is cut, it's dead. Okay? So you need to cut the skin, but the piece of the hair needs to be in the middle without damage. So the risk is when you cut through the skin. Okay? So when you do strip surgery, you're going to do one single cut around that strip. So that means...
Like you marked here.
That's right. You're going to do once... Yeah, but I didn't mark a strip. I just marked donor zones, etc. In that you have to just go around that area. So that means when you do the incision, the hairs along that edge is at risk. That's maybe 5 to 10% of the hairs. Okay? After that, these hairs are cut or dissected under microscope, but now there's a lesser level of risk because now you put the skin aside, which doesn't sound very nice to the ordinary person, but you see it from underneath actually, which means you directly see the root, and so you can avoid cutting it when you prepare the graft, the unit. And so it's at a lesser risk there. So the greatest risk is when you cut through the skin initially, but you're only risking 5 to 10% because that's the amount along the incision line. However, when you do FUE punching, you are cutting each unit individually. So each of those hairs are at equal risk. You could potentially kill all the hairs. So when you do a strip, you're going to cause a scar like a palm crease, but most of the remaining donor area is going to be left scarless and intact. So you're going to just have a line there, okay? But when you do FUE, because you're doing tiny scars all along the donor area, it becomes like a shield of scars. So it makes it less accessible for the remaining hairs. And this is very important. People miss it because everybody needs multiple hair transplants to get an optimal result. But FUE, unfortunately, is a 1 or 2 time surgery. Now we can only talk about, is it strip or is it FUE?
Okay.
And number 2 is, what's the design? That's the second one. So how to use those hairs.
Physically take the strip away from my head to the table.
That's right.
And then you basically have...
Then you cut it into thousands of tiny pieces.
And then what?
And then you put them back.
The same way you do with the second...
That's right, that's right. The second and third parts of the surgery are the same.
So
only the
first
harvesting
one-
method is different.
Right.
The second and third parts are identical.
Time frame wise, how long is the first one? How long is the second?
You can't give because it depends on the amount you do and the difficulty of the patient. Practically, you're using the whole day in both cases.
Right.
Oftentimes, the advanced hair loss case is so advanced, and as I said, there's no such thing as need. You need everything.
Right.
You just take what you can take.
From choosing the obvious reason of going with the one cut. Why would I want to fuck my scalp 7,000 times instead of just one time? I'm already going to punch it freaking 4,000 times or whatever times more right afterwards. So what's the point? I get it, but I know why they choose, because we all saw a lot of pictures back in when I was a kid. It wasn't even practiced that well back then. I am a public figure. Okay, and I have public appearances now, next freaking months.
Okay.
1st of January 2019.
In my life, that I regretted doing strip. Okay? And I was a film artist in Turkey. You know, a good friend of mine as well. He had his hair transplant, and the following year, he was in a series of movies where he razor shaved his scalp. Had he told me that there was chances of, and he kept razor shaving for 2-3 years.
Ooh. In a month from now, will anyone freaking see this scar? The answer is yes or no. If the answer is no, I'm gonna do one. If the answer is yes, I'm gonna do 2.
If you keep razor shaving, then why do you have a hair transplant? That's not a question in deciding between the methods. That's a question to decide whether to have a hair transplant or not. So, this hairstyle, you're doing it like a crew cut, basically close to shaven at the back. No matter you use FUE or FUT, you're going to see changes if that's what you do. So it would require a longer haircut to disguise what's done, you know, on the donor area. That people say that's scarless. No, it is with scar, but because the contrast is so little that you see nothing.
I see what you're saying.
However, when you cause a line, even if you don't cause a visible scar, because it's a line,
Yes.
you can see the crease at least. You can see the crease.
Yes.
Is that I should do FUE with a less aggressive style than I could do in someone who's going to just keep it long. Because I want those scars to be sparse.
Okay.
So now I have to again cheat and do less aggressive FUE, and also I have to feather in. That means the more I go closer to the neck and the sides, I have to decrease my punching density so that it's because those areas are going to be shorter cut. So I need to go decrease my density. So from those, from this design, I'm expecting to harvest between 4,000 to 5,000 hairs. Okay, but now you need to know what we can do with those 4,000 to 5,000 hairs.
But before you go there, can I take more hair from here?
You can use beard hairs.
Is it recommended?
You can use beard hairs. Beard hairs are obviously thicker than scalp hairs, so they cannot be used.
This.
They could be used to mix in somewhere on the top, but they're never used to make a new hairline.
Right.
Okay, so they could be used, but what happens is it depends on because the FUE punching will apply to your beard region now. So we're going to do the same white dots in the beard. Although I realized that the white dots are less visible in the beard region than they are on the scalp. Actually, I've never seen a patient of mine who complained of beard dots.
Nice.
So it looks like good. So there's two approaches I do. Number one is a below the chin bone approach. So I put a line over the bone, not as low as you showed me, right over the bone, and try to take from underneath, which gives me around 1,000 hairs. And there's some people say, well, just take everywhere, and then I take another 1,000. I exclude the beard and goatee,
No.
but then I also
love
take.
this.
Okay, so in that case, you're below the chin.
I'm
It
below
means
the chin.
one day will be spent to take around 1,000 more. So 4,000 or 5,000 here, 1,000. So this frontal tuft could be kept for many years, sometimes even for life.
I know.
So this guides us on what's going to happen in this region here. Then you have a thinning area in between. Then you have the mid-scalp, which is
hair here too.
you used to, yeah, but now you don't. So, so you have some hairs in the mid-scalp, which is at the moment okay, but it's in severe risk of being lost, and which is the region that is dying for medical treatment. And then you have obviously a bald patch in the crown.
This is always going to be.
Exactly. Otherwise, now, if you don't, the consequence is that then you're looking at restoration in the front half. Then you're just conceding the rear half, and you just want a hairline and frontal zone with a bald patch in the crown. So either you accept having the rear half untransplanted for life, but in order to have a nice density in the front half. So this is one option. Or you want to control more of the remaining, then you accept a receded hairline. So we do a recessed hairline, okay? And then the problem with the crown is that hairlines recede like a shore, okay? So if we transplant a hairline, then we guarantee that that hairline is going to stay forever, because the front is already without hair and the rear will be the transplants. So it recedes like a shore. But the crown recedes 360 degrees from all directions. If you transplant the middle of the crown, you're likely to lose hairs around it, hence perhaps like the religious hat in the middle of the crown with no hair around it.
I basically have to decide if I want to restore this place or if I want to spread it equally on a receded line from here onwards.
No, spreading out is not an option.
Yes.
I would go through these black dots, okay, so I would connect them to the side, a slightly receded pattern, but kind of improved, more improved than it is now. And then I would fill in this area here, okay, and then I would fill the crown, and then I would get your medication. In that case, it's going to represent more like a full head of hair for the next 10 years, and then if you lose the hairs around it, well, that's another story.
I believe that this can make me feel better. So I hope that you're gonna enjoy doing this.
That's right.
Okay, me too. Okay, see you later. Okay, let's go.